2 million reais to care for a comatose husband for 18 months. The offer seemed simple until she realized he had heard every whisper, every intimate confession she thought was private. When he finally opened his eyes, he revealed a secret that would destroy everything. Sarah's hands trembled as she signed the contract that would change everything. 22 years old, and she was selling herself to save her mother's life. The ink wasn't even dry when she realized there was no going back. The limousine pulled up to the mansion 3 days later. Sarah pressed her face against the tinted window, watching as iron gates swung open to reveal a world she'd only seen in movies. The Bradford estate stretched endlessly before her, all manicured lawns and century-old oak trees that seemed to whisper secrets she wasn't meant to hear. Her new reality hit her like a slap. She was married now, to a man she'd never met, a man who might never wake up. Mrs. Whitmore answered the door before Sarah could even knock. The woman looked exactly like what Sarah had imagined a wealthy family's housekeeper would look like, all pressed uniforms and stern expressions, but her eyes held something Sarah couldn't quite read. Suspicion, maybe, or pity. "You must be the new Mrs. Bradford," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice carefully neutral. "I've prepared the room next to your husband's." "Your husband?" The words made Sarah's stomach flip. She followed Mrs. Whitmore through hallways lined with portraits of dead Bradfords, their painted eyes seeming to judge her every step. The house smelled like old money and fresh flowers, a combination that made her feel more out of place than ever. "He's in here," Mrs. Whitmore said, stopping at a door Sarah knew would haunt her dreams. "The nurses come twice daily, but you'll be his primary caregiver now. That's what you signed up for, isn't it?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice, and stepped into the room that would become her prison. Michael Bradford lay perfectly still in the center of an enormous bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. He looked younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a face that would have been handsome if it weren't so utterly lifeless. "Car accident," Mrs. Whitmore said from the doorway. 2 years ago. The doctors said he'd never wake up, but the family keeps hoping." She paused, studying Sarah's face. "Though, I wonder sometimes if they really want him to." Before Sarah could ask what she meant, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Mrs. Whitmore straightened, her expression shifting to something more guarded. "That'll be Mr. David," she whispered. "Michael's younger brother. He handles the family business now, and he's not particularly welcoming to strangers." David Bradford appeared in the doorway like a storm cloud, 30 years old, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe, and looking at her like she was something unpleasant he'd found stuck to his shoe. "So you're the latest one," he said, not bothering with introductions. "I hope you understand what you're getting into here." "I'm here to take care of your brother," Sarah said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right. How noble of you. I'm sure the money had nothing to do with it." Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. "My mother is dying. The medical bills—" "Save it," David cut her off. "I've heard it all before. From Jennifer, from Maria, from all the others who thought they could play the devoted wife until something better came along." "Others?" Sarah's blood went cold. "What others?" But David was already walking away, calling over his shoulder, "Mrs. Whitmore will explain the rules. Follow them and we'll all get along just fine. Break them." He didn't finish the threat, but he didn't need to. Mrs. Whitmore closed the door behind him, her face apologetic but resigned. "Don't mind him," she said quietly. "He's been angry for a long time. Angry at the world, angry at God, angry at Michael for leaving him to handle everything alone." "He mentioned others," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Whitmore sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 60 years. "2 girls before you. Both young, both desperate, both gone within 6 months." She met Sarah's eyes. "But you're different. I can see it already." "How am I different?" "You're scared, but you're here. You could have run after David's little performance, but you're still standing in this room looking at Michael like he's a person instead of a paycheck." Mrs. Whitmore moved to adjust the blankets around Michael's still form. The others never looked at him. Not really. That first night, Sarah sat in the chair beside Michael's bed, listening to the rhythm of his breathing and trying to reconcile the man lying before her with the contract that made her his wife. The room was too quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of machines keeping him alive. "I don't know if you can hear me," she whispered into the darkness, "but I want you to know that I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to steal from you. I'm just trying to save my mom." Her voice broke on the last word, and suddenly she was crying, all the fear and desperation of the past weeks pouring out in ugly, silent sobs. She'd been so strong for so long, holding it together while her mother grew weaker, while the medical bills piled up, while every door she knocked on slammed shut in her face. This was her last chance, her only chance. She must have fallen asleep in the chair because she woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and Mrs. Whitmore setting a cup of coffee on the bedside table. "How is he this morning?" Sarah asked, stretching the kinks out of her neck. "Same as always," Mrs. Whitmore said, but something in her tone made Sarah look closer. "Though I could have sworn I saw his eyelids flutter when I came in. Probably just wishful thinking." Sarah's heart jumped, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Has that happened before?" "Sometimes. The doctors say it's normal, just reflexes. But..." Mrs. Whitmore trailed off, studying Michael's face. "Sometimes I wonder if he hears more than we think." The days fell into a routine after that. Sarah would wake early, help the nurses with Michael's care, then spend hours talking to him while she worked on her online nursing courses. She told him about her childhood in the small town where she'd grown up, about her dreams of becoming a doctor, before money became more important than ambition, about her mother's smile, and how it had changed after the diagnosis. She discovered things about Michael too, not from talking to him but from the room itself. Medical textbooks stacked beside philosophy novels, photos of him volunteering at homeless shelters, a framed certificate from a children's hospital thanking him for his donations. "You're not like your brother, are you?" she said one afternoon, running her finger along the spine of a book about social justice. "He thinks money is the answer to everything, but you actually wanted to help people." For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw his fingers twitch. 3 weeks into her new life, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. She was looking for a book to read aloud when she found the hidden compartment in Michael's desk. Inside was a leather journal, filled with handwriting that grew increasingly desperate as the entries progressed. The final entry was dated just 1 day before his accident. "I can't keep pretending I don't know what David's been doing. The overseas factories, the worker conditions, the bribes to keep inspectors quiet. Everything I've tried to build, everything Dad taught me about responsibility and honor, David's been destroying it piece by piece. I have to stop him, but I need proof. Real proof that will hold up in court." Sarah's hands shook as she read the words. If Michael had been investigating his brother's illegal activities, and if David knew about it. Interesting reading. Sarah spun around to find David standing in the doorway, his face calm, but his eyes deadly cold. "I was just looking for a book," she said, trying to hide the journal behind her back. "Of course you were." David stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "You know, Sarah, I've been watching you these past few weeks. You're different from the others, I'll give you that. More thorough." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" He moved closer, and Sarah could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something sharper. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. The others were content to sit by his bed and count the days until their contracts ran out. But you ask questions. You explore. You read things that aren't meant for you. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I'm just trying to understand my husband." "Your husband." David laughed, but it sounded forced. "Do you want to know something about your precious husband, Sarah? He was going to destroy this family. Everything our father built, everything I've worked to preserve, Michael wanted to tear it all down in the name of some misguided sense of justice." "What are you talking about?" "The accident wasn't an accident," David said quietly, and Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Michael was going to meet with federal investigators the next morning. He had documents, evidence of every corner we'd cut, every regulation we'd bent. He was going to destroy us all. Sarah couldn't breathe. You tried to kill him." "I tried to stop him," David corrected. "The plan was never for him to end up like this. But sometimes fate has a sense of irony." "You're insane," Sarah whispered, backing toward the bed where Michael lay unconscious and unaware of the danger surrounding him. "I'm practical," David said. "And now I need to know what you're going to do with what you've learned." before Sarah could answer, before she could scream or run or do anything at all. A sound cut through the tension like a knife, a soft, raspy voice that hadn't been heard in 2 years. "I'm going to tell her everything." Sarah turned, her heart stopping completely, to see Michael Bradford's eyes wide open and staring directly at his brother with an expression of pure, burning rage. David went white as a sheet. "That's impossible. You've been in a coma for 2 years. You can't just wake up." Michael's voice was rough from disuse, but growing stronger with each word. "I've been awake for weeks, David, listening, learning, waiting for the right moment." His eyes found Sarah's, and she saw something in them that made her knees weak. "Waiting for someone I could trust." "How long?" David demanded, his composure cracking. "How long have you been conscious?" "Long enough to hear you confess to attempted murder," Michael said, struggling to sit up. Sarah moved instinctively to help him, and his hand closed around hers with surprising strength. "Long enough to know that Sarah is everything you're not. Honest, caring, brave enough to marry a stranger to save someone she loves." David's face was a mask of rage and fear. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine, and you've been in a coma. Who's going to believe you're mentally competent?" "I will." All three of them turned to see Mrs. Whitmore standing in the doorway, a small recording device in her hand. "I've been suspicious for 2 years," she said calmly. "Suspicious about the timing of the accident, suspicious about David's eagerness to have Michael declared incompetent, suspicious about why he kept hiring young wives instead of just letting Michael go." She looked at the recording device. "This conversation will be very interesting to the police, don't you think?" David looked between the three of them like a trapped animal. For a moment, Sarah thought he might try to run or fight or do something even more desperate. Instead, he laughed, cold and bitter and completely without hope. "You think you've won," he said, looking directly at Sarah. "You think this is your happy ending, but you have no idea what you're getting into. The company, the family, the legacy, it's all built on compromises and dirty money. Michael might want to be a saint, but the real world doesn't work that way." "Then we'll change it," Michael said quietly, his voice gaining strength. "Sarah and I, together." David's smile was sharp as a blade. "Together? You mean the girl who married you for money and the man who's been pretending to be unconscious for weeks? That's your foundation for changing the world." The words hit their mark. Sarah felt the familiar shame wash over her, the voice in her head that said she didn't deserve happiness, that she was just a fraud who'd stumbled into something she couldn't handle. But then Michael's hand tightened around hers, and when she looked at him, she saw something that made her breath catch. He was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, like she was worth fighting for. "Sarah saved my life," he said simply. "Not just by being here when I woke up, but by being someone worth waking up for. David, you can try to destroy what we're building, but you're too late. We've already begun." The sound of sirens in the distance cut through the tension. Mrs. Whitmore must have called the police while they were talking. David's face went through a series of expressions: rage, fear, resignation, and finally, something that might have been relief. "This isn't over," he said, but the fight had gone out of him. "Yes," Michael said quietly, "it is." As the police led David away, as Mrs. Whitmore fussed over Michael and called for doctors, as the mansion erupted in controlled chaos, Sarah sat in her chair and tried to process what had just happened. Everything had changed in a matter of minutes. The man she'd been talking to for weeks was not only awake, but had been listening to every word. The brother-in-law who'd made her life miserable was a would-be murderer. The sweet old housekeeper was apparently some kind of detective, and Sarah herself, was she still the desperate girl who'd signed a contract to save her mother, or had she become something else without realizing it? Sarah. Michael's voice was soft, careful. "I know this is a lot to take in. The deception, the danger, everything that's happened. If you want to leave, if you want to void the contract and walk away from all of this, I'll understand." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd been awake. His eyes were kind, but tired, his face pale from months of inactivity, his hair mussed and too long. He looked vulnerable and uncertain and completely different from the mysterious figure she'd been talking to in the darkness. But somehow he also looked exactly like the person she'd been falling in love with through their one-sided conversations. "I don't want to leave," she said quietly, "but I don't know how to stay either. Everything I thought I knew about this situation, about us, about myself, it's all different now." Michael smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Then maybe we can figure it out together. The real way this time. No contracts, no pretending, no secrets." "No secrets," Sarah agreed, and for the first time since she'd walked into this house, she felt like she might actually belong here. But even as she said it, she wondered what other secrets the Bradford mansion might be hiding, and whether she and Michael would be strong enough to face them together. The first week after Michael woke up was chaos wrapped in careful politeness. Doctors came and went, lawyers filed papers, and reporters camped outside the gates like vultures waiting for scraps of scandal. Through it all, Sarah felt like she was walking on ice that might crack at any moment. Michael was different awake. Not bad, different, just different. The mysterious figure she'd fallen in love with through whispered conversations had become a real man with morning breath and physical therapy appointments, and a tendency to get frustrated when his legs wouldn't cooperate after 2 years of stillness. "I'm not an invalid," he snapped at her on Tuesday morning when she tried to help him into his wheelchair. His hands shook with the effort of transferring himself, but he was determined to do it alone. "I know," Sarah said quietly. "I'm just trying to help. I don't need help, I need—" He stopped, his shoulders sagging. "I'm sorry, I don't know how to do this. Any of this." Sarah understood. She was sitting cross-legged on his bed, still wearing the simple cotton dress that had become her uniform during the Coma months, watching him struggle with buttons that used to be automatic. Everything was backwards now. She was the one who knew the routine, knew where things were, knew how the household worked. He was the stranger in his own life. "We'll figure it out," she said, the same words he'd said to her a week ago, but they felt hollow now, like a promise neither of them was sure they could keep. The real problem wasn't Michael's physical recovery. The real problem was that they were strangers who happened to be legally married, trying to navigate feelings that had developed under completely artificial circumstances. "Did you mean what you said?" Sarah asked that night as she helped him with his evening medications. "About doing this the real way? No contracts, no pretending?" Michael's hands stilled on the pill bottle. "Did you want me to mean it?" It wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. But it was all either of them could manage right then. The breakthrough came 3 days later, when Sarah found Michael in his study at 2 in the morning, surrounded by financial reports and looking like he wanted to set everything on fire. "The company's worse than I thought," he said, without looking up. "David didn't just cut corners, he obliterated them. We're facing lawsuits in 6 countries. The Workers' Compensation Fund has been emptied, and there are EPA violations going back 5 years. Sarah poured herself coffee from the pot he'd made and sat down across from him. "So, what do you want to do about it?" "I want to fix it, all of it, but—" He gestured helplessly at the papers. "It's going to cost everything. The house, the estate, probably the company itself. We'll be lucky to avoid criminal charges." "Good," Sarah said simply. Michael looked up, surprised. "Good? You told me once that you wanted to help people, that you never cared about the money, just the impact you could make." She picked up one of the reports, scanning numbers that made her stomach turn. "So let's help people. Let's make an impact. Sarah, you don't understand. If we do this, we lose everything. The money that's paying for your mother's treatment, the security I promised you, all of it." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking about her mother's last phone call, about the excitement in her voice when she talked about her latest test results, about how the experimental treatment was actually working. "My mother is getting better," she said finally. "Really better. The doctors are calling it remarkable. And you know what? She told me yesterday that she's prouder of me for taking care of someone else than she's ever been of anything I've accomplished. But the bills, we'll get paid. Somehow. But Michael, if we don't do the right thing now, what kind of people does that make us? What kind of marriage would we have if it's built on other people's suffering?" Something shifted in Michael's expression. For the first time since he'd woken up, he looked at her like he was really seeing her. Not just the girl who'd been hired to sit by his bed. "You realize what you're saying," he said slowly. "You're asking me to choose you over everything else. Over money, over family legacy, over security." "No," Sarah corrected. "I'm asking you to choose what's right. I'm just hoping you'll choose to do it with me." Michael was quiet for so long that Sarah started to worry she'd pushed too far. Then he reached across the desk and took her hand. "Okay," he said simply. "Let's burn it all down and build something better." That's when Sarah knew she was falling in love with the real Michael, not the fantasy she'd created during their one-sided conversations. They worked together through the night, creating a plan that was ambitious and probably impossible. They would liquidate everything, the estate, the investments, even the mansion, to create a compensation fund for workers who'd been exploited. They would transform Bradford Industries from a profit-driven corporation into a benefit corporation focused on ethical manufacturing and fair wages. "It's financial suicide," Mrs. Whitmore said when they explained their plan over breakfast, but she was smiling when she said it. "And it's exactly what your father would have done if he'd known what David was up to." "You think so?" Michael asked, and Sarah heard the little boy in his voice, still seeking approval from the people who'd raised him. "I know so. He used to tell me that money without morals is just expensive corruption." Mrs. Whitmore poured more coffee, her movements brisk, but her eyes soft. "He'd be proud of both of you." The first major obstacle came 2 weeks later, when they discovered David had been smarter than they'd given him credit for. From his jail cell, he'd managed to freeze most of the company assets through legal challenges, claiming Michael wasn't mentally competent to make major business decisions so soon after coming out of a coma. "He's not wrong," Michael said grimly after meeting with their lawyers. "I was unconscious for 2 years. Any decent doctor could make a case that I need time to readjust before making decisions this big." "So we wait," Sarah said. "We can't wait. Every day we delay, more people get hurt by the policies David put in place. There are workers in Bangladesh who haven't been paid in 3 months because David diverted their wages to cover legal fees." That night, Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. She called her mother. "Sweetheart, you sound upset," her mother said after the usual pleasantries. "What's wrong?" Sarah explained everything: David's crimes, Michael's plan, the legal challenges, the workers who were suffering while lawyers played games. "And I keep thinking," Sarah finished, "that maybe I should just walk away. Michael doesn't need me complicating his life right now, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to handle all this drama." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed, which wasn't the response Sarah had expected. "Oh, honey," her mother said gently, "you've been strong enough to handle drama your whole life. You put yourself through school while taking care of me. You married a stranger to save my life. You're sitting in a mansion talking about giving up millions of dollars to help people you've never met. If that's not strength, what is? But what if I mess it up? What if I'm not good enough for this life for him?" "Sarah Elizabeth," her mother said in the voice she'd used when Sarah was little and needed a reality check. "That man woke up from a coma, and the first thing he did was defend you. He's planning to give up everything his family built because you convinced him it was the right thing to do. If you're not good enough for him, then he's not good enough for you either." It was exactly what Sarah needed to hear. The next morning, she found Michael in the garden, struggling through his physical therapy exercises with a determination that was both inspiring and heartbreaking to watch. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," she said, settling onto the bench beside where he was stretching. "About not being mentally competent to make big decisions. Sarah, I don't want to talk about what if the decisions weren't coming from you." Michael stopped mid-stretch. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm your legal wife. If something happened to you, I'd have power of attorney, right? But what if we structured it so I had that power now, voluntarily? If the changes were coming from me instead of you, David couldn't claim you're incompetent." Michael stared at her for a long moment. "Sarah, do you understand what you're suggesting? You'd have complete control over everything. The company, the money, all of it. You could take it all and disappear tomorrow, and there wouldn't be anything I could do to stop you." "Yes," Sarah said simply, "I could." "That's not an answer. That's not reassurance. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be trust." The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of wind in the oak trees and the distant hum of traffic beyond the estate walls. Sarah watched Michael's face, seeing him work through all the implications, all the risks, all the ways this could go wrong. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's do it." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He smiled, and it was the same smile she'd fallen in love with when he was unconscious. "You're right. It's about trust. And Sarah, if I can't trust you with everything, then what we're building here isn't worth saving anyway. The legal paperwork, took 3 days. The emotional paperwork took longer. "I need to know," Michael said the night before they were supposed to sign the documents. They were in his study again, but this time the financial reports had been replaced by Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine neither of them had touched. "Know what? If you're doing this for me or for the workers, or because you think it's what I want to hear, I need to know what you really want, Sarah. Not what you think you should want, not what makes you look noble, but what you actually want." It was a fair question, and Sarah took her time answering it. "I want my mother to be proud of me," she said finally. "I want to look in the mirror and like who I see. I want to build something that matters with someone who matters to me." She paused, meeting his eyes. "And I want to find out if what we had when you were unconscious was real, or if it was just me falling in love with my own imagination. And if it was just your imagination, then at least I'll know, and at least we'll have helped some people along the way." Michael nodded slowly. "Those are good reasons. What about you? What do you really want?" "I want to wake up every morning knowing I'm making the world better instead of worse. I want to honor my father's memory by being the man he raised me to be." He hesitated. "And I want to fall in love with you all over again, the right way this time." "The right way?" "With your eyes open, with your heart engaged by choice, not circumstance, with both of us knowing exactly who we are and what we're choosing." Sarah felt something flutter in her chest, something that felt like hope and terror in equal measure. "That sounds terrifying," she said. "Absolutely terrifying," Michael agreed. "Good," Sarah said, and meant it. "The best things usually are." They signed the papers the next morning, and by afternoon, Bradford Industries was under new management. Sarah's first act as the person in charge was to wire emergency funds to the Bangladesh facility. Her second was to announce that the company would be conducting a full audit of all international operations. Her third was to get a phone call that changed everything. "Mrs. Bradford, this is Detective Martinez with the LAPD. We need to talk to you about your husband's accident. We've discovered some new evidence that suggests Mr. David Bradford had help with his plans." Sarah's blood went cold. "What kind of help?" "The kind that's still walking free. Can you and your husband come to the station this afternoon?" "And Mrs. Bradford, until we sort this out, you might want to consider hiring some security." Sarah hung up the phone with shaking hands, wondering what other secrets the Bradford family was hiding and whether she and Michael would survive long enough to uncover them all. But even as fear crept up her spine, she realized something that surprised her. She wasn't thinking about running anymore. Whatever came next, whoever was still out there, whatever dangers they were about to face, she was going to face them with Michael. Not because she had to, not because of any contract or legal obligation or financial necessity, because she chose to. Because for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she wanted to be, with exactly the person she wanted to be with, even if it might get them both killed. The police station smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. Sarah held Michael's hand as Detective Martinez spread photos across the metal table, like he was dealing cards in a game nobody wanted to play. "Rebecca Chen," Martinez said, pointing to a professional headshot of an Asian woman in her 30s. "David's personal assistant for the past 3 years, also his lover, though they kept that quiet. And according to our investigation, she's the one who planted the device that caused your husband's car to malfunction." Sarah's grip on Michael's hand tightened. "Where is she now?" "That's the problem. She disappeared 3 days after David's arrest. Cleaned out her apartment, emptied her bank accounts, vanished like smoke." Martinez flipped to another photo, this one grainy surveillance footage. "But she was spotted yesterday at LAX. We think she's planning to run, which means she might try to tie up loose ends first." "Loose ends?" Michael said quietly. "You mean us? I mean you need protection until we can bring her in. Rebecca Chen doesn't just run errands for powerful men. She specializes in making problems disappear permanently." The ride home was silent except for the sound of their security detail's radio crackling with codes Sarah didn't understand. Michael stared out the window like he was seeing the world for the first time, his jaw tight with an emotion she couldn't read. "Talk to me," Sarah said as they pulled through the estate gates. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about the journal," Michael said slowly. "The one you found in my desk. I wrote about needing proof that would hold up in court, but I never mentioned Rebecca specifically. Which means either I didn't know about her involvement or Or what? Or I did know and I was protecting her somehow. That possibility hung between them like a loaded gun as they entered the mansion. Mrs. Whitmore was waiting in the foyer, her face pale but determined. "There's been another development," she said without preamble. "I found something while cleaning out David's old room. Something I think you need to see." She led them to the library, where she'd spread documents across the mahogany table like pieces of a puzzle she'd been trying to solve for years. "David kept copies of everything," Mrs. Whitmore said, "including emails between him and Rebecca going back 2 years, but these," she pointed to a stack of printed messages, "these are from before Michael's accident. They're not just planning corporate espionage. They're planning his murder." Sarah's legs went weak. She sank into a chair as Michael picked up one of the emails, his face growing darker with each line he read. "The board meeting is scheduled for Monday," he read aloud. "If M presents his evidence, then we lose everything. The Malaysian contract alone would put us in federal prison. We need a permanent solution before the weekend." "Keep reading," Mrs. Whitmore said grimly. "I know you have feelings for him, but sentiment is a luxury we can't afford. One car accident, one tragic loss, and all our problems disappear. The company stays profitable, the family reputation stays intact, and you and I can finally be together without hiding." Michael's hands were shaking now. "She was in love with me." "Obsessed is more accurate," Mrs. Whitmore said. "I found her personnel file in David's things. She'd been watching you for months before David ever approached her. Photos of you at charity events, copies of your speeches, even your coffee order from the cafe downtown. David didn't recruit her to spy on you. She recruited him to help her get rid of what she saw as obstacles to being with you." "What obstacles?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Mrs. Whitmore's expression grew even grimmer. "Anyone who got close to you. The last 3 women who worked as your assistants all quit after receiving threatening messages. Your college girlfriend broke up with you after someone sent her photos that made it look like you were cheating. Even your physical therapist after your skiing accident 2 years ago quit suddenly after someone made threats against her family." The room went dead silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Sarah felt like she was drowning in implications she hadn't seen coming. "She's been orchestrating my isolation for years," Michael said slowly, "making sure I stayed alone, vulnerable, dependent on people she could control or eliminate. And when David told her about his investigation into the company's illegal activities," Mrs. Whitmore continued, "she saw an opportunity to remove 2 obstacles at once. David would take the blame for your death. She'd comfort the grieving family and eventually work her way into your inheritance." "But I didn't die," Michael said. "No, you went into a coma instead, which gave her time to adjust her plan." Mrs. Whitmore pulled out another stack of papers. "The marriage contracts, Michael. For Jennifer, for Maria, for Sarah. Rebecca wrote those contracts. She convinced David they were a good way to maintain appearances while she figured out her next move." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. "She chose us. All of us. She chose women she thought she could control or eliminate if necessary. Jennifer was threatened into leaving. Maria was offered more money to disappear quietly. But Sarah," Mrs. Whitmore looked at her with something like admiration. "Sarah was different. She actually cared about you, actually stayed, actually fought for you. Rebecca didn't plan for that." "So what's her plan now?" Michael asked. Before Mrs. Whitmore could answer, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing the library in an eerie red glow. Somewhere in the house, an alarm began to wail. Sarah heard shouts from the security team, then the sharp crack of gunshots. "She's here," Michael said unnecessarily. Mrs. Whitmore moved with surprising speed for a 60-year-old woman, pulling a gun from her apron pocket that Sarah was pretty sure housekeepers weren't supposed to have. "There's a safe room behind the wine cellar," she said. "Can you get there?" "What about you?" Sarah asked. "Someone needs to hold her off. Go, now." More gunshots echoed through the house, closer this time. Michael grabbed Sarah's hand, and they ran, his newly strengthened legs carrying him better than she'd expected. Behind them, Mrs. Whitmore disappeared into the shadows like she'd been doing this her whole life. They made it to the wine cellar before the first explosion shook the house. Bottles crashed to the floor, filling the air with the smell of expensive alcohol and broken glass. "Here," Michael said, pulling at what looked like a solid wine rack. It swung open to reveal a small room with concrete walls and enough supplies to last a week. My father had it built during the Cold War. Paranoid old man, but apparently he had good instincts. They sealed themselves inside and listened to the sounds of violence echoing through their home. Sarah found herself thinking about how much had changed since she'd first walked through these halls. Then she'd been a desperate girl playing a role she didn't understand. Now she was a woman fighting for something she'd chosen to build. "I need to tell you something," Michael said suddenly. His face was pale in the emergency lighting, but his voice was steady. "Before this goes any further, before we don't get another chance." "Michael, I was awake longer than I told you. Not weeks, months. I heard every conversation you had with me, every story you told, every time you cried yourself to sleep in that chair." He took her hands in both of his. "I heard you tell me about your dreams, about your mother, about feeling like you never deserved good things. And I heard you slowly start to believe that maybe you did deserve them. Maybe you deserved to be happy. Why didn't you wake up sooner? Because I was falling in love with you, and I knew that once I woke up, everything would change. The woman talking to my unconscious body, telling me her secrets, letting me see her heart. I was terrified that person would disappear once you knew I was listening." Another explosion rocked the house, closer this time. "And did she disappear?" Sarah asked. "No, she got stronger, braver, more beautiful than I ever imagined." Michael's voice cracked slightly. "Sarah, if we don't make it out of here, I need you to know that you saved me in every way a person can be saved. Not just from David's plan, not just from the coma, but from being alone, from being the kind of man who inherited money instead of earning love. We're going to make it out," Sarah said firmly. "Both of us. Together." The lights in the safe room flickered and died, plunging them into complete darkness. In the distance, they could hear footsteps on the cellar stairs. "I know you're down here," a woman's voice called out, sing-song and terrifying in its cheerfulness. "Michael? Are you listening? It's Rebecca. I've missed you so much." Sarah felt Michael tense beside her. They sat in absolute silence, barely breathing, as footsteps moved around the wine cellar. "I know about your little wife," Rebecca continued conversationally. "Such a sweet story. The desperate girl who married the sleeping prince. Very romantic, very temporary." Glass shattered somewhere nearby. Rebecca was smashing wine bottles, probably looking for the hidden door. "You know, I've been watching her for months now. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell from that charming little town in Ohio. Nursing school dropout, medical bills for mommy, no father in the picture. So very tragic. So very convenient for my purposes." Sarah's blood chilled. Rebecca had been watching her since before the marriage contract, which meant she was never random, Michael whispered, understanding at the same time. "Rebecca chose you specifically. This whole thing was a setup from the beginning." "Oh, very good," Rebecca called out, apparently hearing them. "Yes, Sarah was perfect for my needs. Young enough to be dismissed, desperate enough to be controlled, pretty enough to make you feel protective. I knew that if anyone could wake you up, it would be someone you felt you needed to save. More crashing, getting closer. But then she had to go and actually make you happy, didn't she? Had to make you want to be better, want to change the world, want to do all those noble things that are so very inconvenient for people like me." The sound of metal scraping against stone made Sarah's skin crawl. "Found you," Rebecca sang out. The wine rack door burst open, and suddenly Rebecca Chen was silhouetted in the emergency lighting, holding a gun that looked too big for her small hands, but perfectly natural in her grip. She was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful. Sharp features, perfect makeup even after breaking into a house and committing multiple felonies, clothes that probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. "Hello, darling," she said to Michael, completely ignoring Sarah. "You look wonderful, much better than when you were sleeping." "Rebecca," Michael said carefully, "you don't have to do this." "Oh, but I do. You see, I've invested 3 years of my life in you, Michael. 3 years of careful planning, strategic positioning, elimination of obstacles. I'm not about to let some nobody from Ohio ruin everything now." She stepped into the safe room, gun trained on Sarah. "But I do want you to know," Rebecca continued, "that I never intended for you to suffer. The coma was an unfortunate side effect. I'd hoped for something quicker, cleaner. But it worked out in the end, didn't it? You got to rest, I got to prepare, and now we can finally be together, the way we were always meant to be." "The way we were meant to be?" Michael's voice was carefully neutral, but Sarah could hear the anger building underneath. "Rebecca, we were never together. We were barely colleagues. We had a connection," Rebecca said sharply. "Every time you smiled at me, every thank you, every late night when we worked together on charity projects, you felt it too. I was being polite, professional. You were being careful, maintaining appropriate boundaries until the time was right." Rebecca's smile was bright and absolutely terrifying. "Well, now the time is right. David is in prison where he belongs. Sarah will be gone, and you and I can build the life we've been working toward. What makes you think I'd want to be with someone who tried to murder me? Because I did it for us, Michael. Everything I did was for us. The obstacles I removed, the competition I eliminated, even working with David to expose the company's problems, it was all to make you free to be with me." Sarah realized with horrible clarity that Rebecca genuinely believed what she was saying. In her mind, orchestrating Michael's attempted murder was an act of love. "Rebecca," Sarah said quietly, "he doesn't love you. He never did. Hand-killing me isn't going to change that." Rebecca's eyes snapped to her for the first time, and Sarah saw madness there, bright and sharp as broken glass. "You don't know him like I do," Rebecca said. "You've only been here a few months. I've been loving him for years." "Have you?" Sarah asked. "Because love isn't about eliminating people who get in your way. Love isn't about forcing someone to need you. Love is about wanting someone to be happy, even if it's not with you." "Shut up," Rebecca snapped. "Michael loves me," Sarah continued, surprised by her own certainty. "And I love him. Not because we have to, not because we're trapped together, but because we choose each other every day. That's something you'll never have, no matter how many people you hurt." "I said shut up." Rebecca raised the gun, and Sarah saw her finger tighten on the trigger. But before she could fire, Mrs. Whitmore appeared behind her like an avenging angel in an apron, bringing a wine bottle down on Rebecca's head, with the kind of precision that suggested this wasn't her first time ending a dangerous situation. Rebecca crumpled to the ground, unconscious, but breathing. "Well," Mrs. Whitmore said, slightly out of breath, "that was dramatic." Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Michael pulled Sarah against him, and she could feel his heart hammering against her chest. "Is it over?" she asked. "It's over," Mrs. Whitmore confirmed, zip-tying Rebecca's hands with practiced efficiency. The security team called for backup the moment she broke through the perimeter. "She'll be in custody within minutes." "Mrs. Whitmore," Michael said slowly, "you're not really just a housekeeper, are you?" The older woman smiled mysteriously. "I'm whatever this family needs me to be, dear. Always have been." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same library where they'd hidden from Rebecca, but everything was different now. The room was full of people, workers from the newly reformed Bradford Industries, families who'd been helped by their compensation fund, reporters covering the company's transformation into a model of ethical business practices. Michael was at the podium, giving a speech about corporate responsibility that would probably be quoted in business schools for years to come. But Sarah wasn't listening to his words. She was watching his face, the way his eyes found hers in the crowd, the way he smiled when he talked about building something meaningful with people you love. They'd sold the mansion, as planned. The money had gone to the compensation fund, and they'd moved into a smaller house that felt more like home than the Bradford estate ever had. Sarah had finished her nursing degree and was working at a free clinic they'd established downtown. Michael split his time between running the reformed company and the foundation they'd created together. Her mother was in remission and had started dating a widower from her support group. David was serving a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against Rebecca, who would probably spend the rest of her life in prison for attempted murder and a dozen other charges. Mrs. Whitmore had moved with them to the new house, where she continued to manage their household with mysterious efficiency, and an arsenal that Sarah had decided not to ask about. But the biggest change was in Sarah herself. The girl who'd married a stranger to save her mother was gone, replaced by a woman who'd learned that she deserved love, not because she'd earned it through sacrifice, but simply because she existed. "And finally," Michael was saying from the podium, "I want to thank my wife Sarah, who taught me that the most valuable thing we can give isn't money or resources, but the courage to choose love over fear, progress over tradition, and hope over cynicism. The applause was thunderous, but Sarah only heard Michael's voice as he stepped down from the podium and made his way to her through the crowd. "How did I do?" he asked, pulling her close. "You were perfect," she said, meaning it. "We were perfect," he corrected. "We are perfect." And as he kissed her in the middle of their chosen family, surrounded by the life they'd built from the ashes of someone else's empire, Sarah finally understood what it meant to be home. Not a place you ended up, but a choice you made every day, with someone who chose you back.